Good afternoon. I want to welcome you to this global conversation brought to you by the Pachamama Alliance and sponsored by two really great companies. Arjuna Capital, empowering you to integrate your values into your investments and manage your influence in the world. And by Spirituality and Health magazine, covering the people, practices, and ideas of the spiritual renaissance and their impact on well-being. My name is Konda Mason, and I'm your host for this conversation.
And so I just want to tell you a little bit about Marianne Williamson. She is an internationally acclaimed spiritual author and lecturer. 6 of her 10 published books have been New York Times Bestsellers. 4 of these have been #1 New York Times Bestsellers. The book we are speaking about today, that I think all of you should know by now, is Healing the Soul of America, Reclaiming Our Voices as Spiritual Citizens. Marianne is also the founder of Project Angel Food, which is a Meals on Wheels program that serves homebound people with AIDS in the Los Angeles area. And she also founded the Department of Peace campaign, a grassroots campaign to establish a United States Department of Peace. In 2006, a Newsweek magazine poll named Marianne Williamson one of the 50 most influential baby boomers. And now, Marianne is running for Congress. She is a candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives from California's 33rd District. You can find her website at marianneforcongress.com. Marianne, welcome, and thank you so much for taking time to be with us this afternoon.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your generous words. I'm honored. I'm grateful. Thank you.
So I want to start out by talking a little bit about the Pachamama Alliance. I think the Pachamama Alliance is best known for the symposium that we do that is called Awakening the Dreamer, Changing the Dream, that's facilitated all over the world. And the mission of the symposium is to bring forth an environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, and socially just human presence on the planet. Now, in this speaker series, we took the next step and decided to take a deep look at the systems and structures that stand in the way of having that just, fulfilling, and sustainable world. And your book, Healing the Soul of America, which you wrote in 1997 and is so appropriate at this moment in time, you talk a lot about the systems and the structures and what's broken. Yeah. So, and now you're running for Congress. And so you are boldly stepping forward to engage and transform those systems. So first I want to talk about a little bit, if you can explain the breakdown of these systems that we're talking about. And then it seems to me, I'm wondering, do you believe by your running for Congress that the best way to engage and transform them is to work for them, to get involved in them, to go into the inside, into the belly of the systems? And I'm wondering why now? Why are you running right now? So that's kind of a big question, but if you can delve into that, that would be great.
Well, you were talking about how Pachamama is dedicated to global transformation, sustainable living, and so forth. And I think certainly that's the zeitgeist of this time. I'm not saying that I think electoral politics is the best way to go about that transformation. I'm just saying that electoral politics cannot be left out of any serious formulation. There is a limit to what you can do from the sidelines alone. As important as the social shift is, as important as the lifting consciousness is, as important as the NGOs are, as important as the online petitions are, you still, I heard a fireman who was running for office, and he was asked by a journalist, you're a firefighter, why are you actually running for office? And he said, well, firefighters are first responders. And when we go to check out a fire, if it's bad enough, we can't just lobby the fire. We can't just change things outside the house. If it's bad enough, we have to get in there. So that's why I'm running for office, not because I think that it's better than anything that is going on, Pachamama Alliance or anything else. And as you mentioned before, I'm very involved in all those things and have been. But we cannot leave out electoral politics. And this idea that somehow if we just ignore it, it will wither away. No, our ignoring it only makes it stronger. The very forces that we would wish to nonviolently resist are absolutely thrilled that we don't participate more in electoral politics. Because by not voting, by not participating, you are passively participating. And I believe that at a certain point, there's an awakening of our social and political responsibilities that comes with knowing that. You can't be selectively conscious. You can't just work outside the system. And remember, the system itself, what is the system? By the system, do you mean the U.S. Constitution, or do you mean what's happened in the last few decades? The U.S. Constitution is one of the most brilliant documents ever provided. The issue is how there have been times in our history, and there are times today, when the actual behavior of the U.S. government, behavior of American civilization, is at odds with the Constitution, starting with the founding of this country. You can't get more enlightened than the principles founded in our Constitution. However, those principles were encoded there by men, quite a few of whom were themselves slave owners. So we were born of a dichotomy between these profoundly enlightened principles and what is sometimes behavior on our part that transgresses against them. Now, at our best, what we have done is that we have engaged the system, because you cannot transform what you refuse to engage. Abolitionists, of course, they engaged the system. You weren't going to abolish slavery without a constitutional amendment and, of course, the Civil War. The suffragettes engaged the system. You weren't going to give women the right to vote without working towards a constitutional amendment. Civil rights workers engaged the system. You weren't going to end segregation in the American South without civil rights legislation. And I think today the underlying issue, the cancer that is eating away our democracy, is the undue influence of money on our system. Good luck with all the green juice, everybody, and good luck with all this environmental activism, which is extraordinary. But if we continue to allow American democracy to be bought and sold by oil companies, by chemical companies, by big agricultural companies, by health insurance companies, by pharmaceutical companies, there's a limit to what we can do in order to adequately deal with the challenges of our time, whether it has to do with global climate change, corruption of our food supply, income inequality, or anything else. So I think that there's tremendous social and political potential here in those of us who are interested in this kind of larger sustainability movement, particularly the sustainability movement married to the spiritual activism. Abolition kind of came from the Quakers. Women's suffrage came in large part from the Quakers. The civil rights movement came from a preacher. Dr. King was a preacher from Atlanta and the Southern Christian leadership level. So the spiritual communities have not only never been separate from the larger narrative of improvement and course correction in American history, spiritual communities have in fact been the foundation, the cornerstone of every great social justice movement in our country's history, and that's what I think is happening now. We who hold deeply to the vertical axis are about to do what we have always done throughout history at our best, and that is to have a real influence on the horizontal axis of the mortal world. And I think we're pregnant with that now. And I think organizations like Pachamama and all of this movement, this zeitgeist, is just, preparing the field, coding the field, and it's about to burst forth into something. I hope, obviously, that I will win my seat in Congress. I think that will be, one big first. But this is bigger than any one organization or any one woman's election to Congress. If we do start running people, actual candidates, which I think needs to be done, actual running of candidates based on this kind of sensibility and worldview, the more that this happens, the more we win seats, then you're creating a seat of possibility and a really space of possibility in this country that really is and will be historic.
Wow. So you wrote the book that we're looking at in 1997. That was 14 years ago. And now you've decided to run. I'm wondering if something bubbled up that why now? And was there any impetus that brought it on at this moment?
Well, at what point in any of our lives do we feel enough is enough? I can't be quiet anymore. Martin Luther King said, your life begins to end on the day you stop talking about things that matter most. When I wrote that book in 1997, I was able to articulate a lot of the things that seem prescient now. But I'm trained as a metaphysician. So when you have the eye of a metaphysician, you read the level of cause. So you can predict effects, because if you see the cause, you know the effects are coming. The corporatist trends, I wasn't so much hip at that time, because I don't think until 9/11 we didn't have to worry about this terrible shrinking of civil liberties or even the domestic surveillance. But the basic corporatist trend was there. Even the militarist trend was there. But at that time, most of us still had faith that the political system would address this. By now, the idea that I always say the Republicans are throwing us over a cliff, the Democrats are trying to keep us from falling over a cliff, and it is the American people who will now take us out of the vicinity of the cliff. We now have a government of a few of the people, by a few of the people, and for a few of the people. And both of our major political parties are so beholden to that. And then they have this chokehold on the system that's sucking the oxygen out of our public discourse. So to look to our traditional political status quo to fix this terribly toxic brew, the shrinking civil liberties, the expanding corporate influence, the domestic surveillance, to look to the traditional political status quo to end this, it's ridiculous. They created it. There were very specific policies, tax policies, banking policies, trade policies. I mean, this stuff didn't come from nowhere, and we need to stop being separate citizens. And, those of us who know from the idea of being awake to what's going on in your life, if those of us who are awake to being what's going on in our individual lives aren't the ones to speak out and suggest that we all become more awake about what's going on in our collective life, then who's going to do that?
Wow. So, as you say, the movement for change is just undeniable, what's happening right now on the planet, right? And when I look at the political sphere in America, first it began, starting from 2004 with Obama's election, right? We had the Yes We Can Obama movement that actually got an African-American man elected to the President of the United States, which I never thought, honestly, I'd see in my lifetime. Then shortly after that rose up the Tea Party movement, what was clearly a reaction to the Obama administration. And then following that, we had the Occupy movement, right, which framed the discussion as gross economic disparity, the 1% versus the 99%. I'd love to hear your thoughts on those movements and what you think, and if you think your own candidacy has benefited from those movements or related to them in any way.
Yes, I was among the extraordinarily passionate supporters of the president in 2008, but I'm among the deeply disappointed in the president as well. We all had tremendous hope in real fundamental change in 2008, but you're in trouble when you are quoting Sarah Palin when she said, how's that hopey changey thing working out for you? So I would not say that my candidacy is so much aligned with the president, although there are some issues where, of course, I agree with them. But in general, the Obama presidency has only convinced me that towing the line with the Democratic Party is not the answer. I think progressives have a codependent relationship with the Democratic Party. They come out for us with all that marvelous yes we can type of stuff. They come out for us every time there's an election, and then they ignore us until the next one. And I think it's time for us to wake up to that. The Tea Party, I got to tell you something about the Tea Party. Even though I don't agree with them on most things politically, they have a revolutionary fervor that I kind of admire. We could do some of that. They don't toe the line with a political party, and we shouldn't be so much either. In terms of the Occupy movement, though, I think that my candidacy would not exist without the Occupy movement. The Occupy movement, I think, was extraordinarily successful. I don't understand these people say, yeah, but it didn't do anything. It didn't do anything. Excuse me. The average American now realizes that there is a 1%. If that's not success, I don't know what is. That's such an awakening. The average American realizes you have 1% of our population controlling 38 to 40% of our wealth. You have a 60% of our population living on 2.3% of our wealth. Konda, you were talking about sustainability. That disparity that I just articulated is not just undemocratic, which it is. It's not just immoral, which it is. It's not just unethical, which it is. It is unsustainable.
Yeah.
And I feel the Occupy movement gave a great burst of energy to those of us who wish. Martin Luther King said your life begins to end on the day you stop talking about things that matter. That stuff matters. But it's one of the reasons that I and many of us, I'm running as an independent, and many of us consider ourselves as independent, because towing the line with either major political party, one far more than the other, but it doesn't matter. We really need to get over the lesser of two evils paradigm and just establish what we believe is correct and what we believe is true. And that has to do with repudiating, not advocating for, or even sucking up to the corporatocracy that now runs this country. We repudiated an aristocracy 200 years ago, and it's time for us to repudiate an aristocracy again.
Such a bold move to go independent. I mean, I think you're right. You know, the progressive movement has aligned itself with the Democratic Party, even in total frustration. in total frustration, and yet it's like that's what you have to do because being an independent, no one wins as an independent, so to speak. No one wins as an independent. Are you do you think the time is right now?
Yeah, I mean, we need to disenthrall ourselves of that. You know, the political parties are not mentioned in the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. George Washington warned us against them in his farewell address. Abolition did not come from a major party. It came from the Abolitionist Party. Women's suffrage did not come from a major party. It came from the Suffragette Party. Civil rights movement obviously did not come from a major party. Major parties then enact these movements once they're already established, but the movements come from the people. So this idea that everything we do has to be filtered through a Democrat or Republican lens is very unhealthy for our democracy, and it's we who have to wake up. In a race like mine, for instance, there is no possibility of splitting the vote. There have to be 3 people to split the vote. And here in California, we have an open primary. The primary is on June 3rd, and whoever wins the top 2 vote getters go to the general election in November. So, you know, there's no way to split a vote here. We really need to wake up from this. That's all it is. It's just this false belief we have that we have no choice. The founders did not give power to political parties. They gave power to us. And the way we keep bowing and cowing to the political parties is very unhealthy, and it's we who need to awaken it.
Well, you know, we were talking about, you were talking earlier about, you know, the promise of democracy, and from the very beginning, we have this incredible document, and yet we have, from the very beginning, fallen short of the ideals. At the same time that the words liberty and justice for all were being written, you know, we were completely economically, socially, and politically benefiting from slavery. I mean, and yet we were talking about liberty and justice for all. So my question is, how do we transform ourselves so that we can no longer tolerate injustice anywhere, so that we can no longer tolerate the what's happening to our democracy? What do we have to do to no longer tolerate that? How do we transform our inner self?
Well, it's when your last line, how do we transform our inner self? It has to do with transforming the inner self and the outer world. First of all, what you're saying is true. That dichotomy has always been there. There has always been in every generation the forces which sought to more fully embody and make manifest the ideals of democracy, and there have been forces that resisted that. But I think if we look at the entire narrative of American history, it's important to remember we have tended to self-correct. That's extremely important. We're part of a large lineage of Americans who self-corrected. So we had slavery, yes, but a generation arose and we abolished slavery. Women did not have the right to vote, but a generation arose and passed the 19th Amendment. There was legalized segregation and Jim Crow laws in the American South, but a generation arose and forged the civil rights movement. That is the point. Generations before us have risen up and done the work necessary. You do the work necessary to close the gap that represents the breach between who we say we are and what we're actually doing. Now, in our time, the question is, will we be the first generation to whip out on what it takes to do that? I mean, do you think it was easy for the abolitionists? Do we think it was easy for the suffragettes? Do we think it was easy for the civil rights movement? No, but they weren't just trying to figure out and process. They did a lot of that, obviously, but they did what needed to be done. And I think sometimes that level of seriousness is what's necessary. At a certain point, you do things not because you feel like doing them. You do them because they're the right thing to do. And I believe that what we're experiencing today, at a time when we're basically making a mockery of the Gettysburg Address, we're not a government of the people, by the people, and for the people these days. We're a government of a few of the people, by a few of the people, for a few of the people. That's the situation we're faced with, which is, as was slavery, as was the lack of suffrage, as was segregation, it represents a gap, a swerve away from our democratic ideal, a gap between who we say we are and what we are. We were talking about liberty and justice for all. We have the highest mass incarceration rate in the world, higher than Russia, higher than China, higher than Iran. We've got 2.4 million people in prison in the United States today. 500,000 of those are nonviolent drug offenders, and an African-American male today has a 1 in 3 lifetime probability of incarceration. And our question is, what do I have to go through inside myself to get to the point of saying this is morally unacceptable? That is what the abolitionists realized. It is morally unacceptable. That is what the suffragettes realized. That is what the civil rights workers, this is morally unacceptable. And I stand within the deepest place of my being. And this is where spirituality comes in. Because those of us who are grounded in an internal sense of self know how to stand firm behind a conviction. You stand firm about what you refuse to participate with, but you also carry the spiritual power of knowing that the other possibility, the alternative possibility, is through the grace of God eminently feasible. And that is the power of the spiritual activists, which were the Quakers, the abolitionists, and so forth. So at this point, I think we need to, at a certain point, you process, but after that, going on too long just processing is indulgence. You honor your feelings, but you don't spew your feelings. And at a certain point, it is time. Of course, we want to honor the being as well as the acting, but I think with the spiritual and higher consciousness community, sometimes we honor the being so much that we need to be reminded to get on into the doing as well. That is the yin and the yang. That is the both and. Just like Pachamama, it doesn't just talk about these things. There are these trips down to South America and all of that. And so Pachamama, of course, stands for that, which is the both and. And like I said, with those great social justice movements, they engage the system. So for me personally, what does that mean? Each of us are led, each of us are guided to the part that we feel internally, that we are moved by spirit, by nature, by source, by whatever we want to call it, to how we can best serve, how we can best contribute. I have felt this calling to run for office. It's not a better calling or a worse calling. It's just the calling that I felt. But I will tell you this, when it comes to someone running for office, no candidate can do it by ourselves. So this is either a collaborative venture in which a lot of people feel moved to give support, moved to give money, put it on Facebook, Twitter, vote, all that, or it doesn't happen. And I hope that this campaign helps to create a larger conversation within the zeitgeist about how running people for office and actually winning this campaign, representing these values, is one of the steps we need to take next.
First of all, I love you.
I love you too. Thank you.
I mean, it's
American
just so,
women.
Yeah, right? Remember what His Holiness said? Anyway, right? I am just thrilled that you're running. And when I think about activists and my activist friends, and, I consider myself an activist as well, so often, especially the progressive, have just thrown the baby out with the bathwater, have thrown out religion, have thrown it away. And yet at the same time, the core of the work comes from love. The core of the work comes from love, and it gets buried under anger and frustration and what have you. And then we have this separation of church and state, right, which is important. And yet you're like playing with these lines, Marianne. You are really kind of like, it's like these lines are being moved by somewhere in the middle of your spirituality and politics. Can you talk a little bit about that, like the separation of church and state, yet spirituality and politics are inseparable?
Yes, and thank you for asking. I don't feel I'm blurring any lines at all, actually. Separation of church and state is one of the most enlightened aspects of our Constitution. When we were children, we learned about how people had come over here in the early days to escape religious persecution. The separation of church and state has a dual function. It protects the government from undue influence by the religious sector. You're not going to have a rabbi, priest, minister, mufti come into the Congress, as in, let's say, like a country like Iran, and say you can or cannot pass this or that law. That's not going to happen here because of the separation of church and state. And no church, mosque, synagogue, Course in Miracles group, Buddhist gathering, Wicca circle is going to have a policeman come in and say, break it up, you're not on the official list. Once again, protecting the religious and spiritual sector from undue influence by government. So that is one of the most important principles of our freedom. Having said that, spirituality has nothing to do with religious dogma or doctrine. Spirituality is the call of the heart. Spirituality is the journey within ourselves from fear to love, from a life of bondage to self to a life of liberation from self and a sense of a greater belonging to other living beings. That's what spirituality is. So the life that does not involve that conversation is a life that is not deeply human. And a nation that does not put that conversation at the center of its civilization and of its society is one that is moving away from alignment with its deepest human self. We are more than economic creatures. And yet our political conversation posits that we are a little more than economic creatures. And just as in our own individual lives, if all that matters is externals and not values, then you enter realms of chaos and you produce suffering for yourself and others. And that's what's happened with our economic system. That's what's happened with our government. It's a lack of ethics. It's making money rather than humanitarian values the bottom line. This is what's got to shift. We need a politics of conscience. Now, there's nothing religious about that. Those principles happen to be at the core of religious systems, but religion is not at the core of those values. You know, someone who knew him said about Abraham Lincoln, he's so religious, he's beyond religion. This is so deeply religious, it's beyond religion. It's just talking about the heart matters, the children matter. There's nothing particularly religious about pointing out that 1 in 5 American children live in poverty, and that among all advanced nations of the world, we are second only to Romania. Now, to me, this is a moral issue. Economic injustice is a moral issue. Children living in poverty in the greatest, most powerful country in the world is a moral issue. Preemptive war is a moral issue. But there's no transgression about church and state here. I honor it and appreciate its absolutely huge significance to our freedom as the next American does. But the founders were not meaning to suppress the spiritual conversation with that principle. They were meaning to liberate and protect it.
Mm-hmm. You know, in the book, you talk a lot about, you mentioned the concepts of yin and yang throughout. And and then we just mentioned, I briefly mentioned, so I want to just dive into it, what His Holiness the Dalai Lama said about the Western woman being the one to really transform the world. And you know, that's a real deep inquiry of why he said that. And then when you talk about yin and yang, and then you're running, and I'm wondering if the feminine energy, do you ascribe to the fact that the feminine energy is what is necessary right now?
Yes, I do ascribe to the fact that the feminine energy is what is necessary right now, in that the woman is the mother and the woman is the homemaker, archetypally. That does not necessarily just mean your own biological children. We need to recognize that every child on this earth is one of our children, and we need to recognize that the earth itself is our home. So as the nurturer, the mother, the care of the children, the care of the home, recognizing the planet as our home, recognizing that all children are our children, I absolutely do. As far as the Dalai Lama is concerned, I have the same absolute, deep honor and respect for the Dalai Lama as anybody does. But American women, it bothers me the thought that we need any man, even the Dalai Lama, to verify this. The people that we need to be recognizing that the Western world will change because of the Western women is Western women. That's what I want to hear stated with conviction, is us. And so I do believe, a man said it. Any man, So I think that American women should be a moral force on the planet. And I actually think it's starting to happen. Something is rising up. I'm excited about the possibilities.
Yeah, I think something is absolutely rising up. And I think when he said Western, I don't think he meant American. I think he's talking about Western.
Oh, no, I didn't. No, of course he didn't. I was making a point about American women. Well, I think a lot of women in other countries, are already doing more, actually. But American women are starting to show up. We're not nothing. But I do think it's important. The president signed a farm bill, Konda, a few weeks ago, which takes $8 billion out of food stamps over the next 10 years, and that will affect mainly children and old people and military veterans. Now, the America I want to see is one in which neither the president or any congressperson, any senator would even begin to think that the women of this country would stand for that. Mm. And when we have become collectively who we need to be, they wouldn't care.
What's it going to take, Marianne? What's it going to take for us to stand up and to claim and to say right is right, wrong is wrong? What is it going to take for us to bring back that spirit of the 60s where we really are not allowing injustice to happen?
Well, I think we need to stop indulging ourselves. You know, that's sometimes, like I said, that's the shadow side sometimes of the higher consciousness community. You know, we wait till we feel like doing something before doing it. That makes a weak person. Sometimes you do something because it's the right thing to do. We are too casual with the phrase, I support you. Oh, I really support you in doing that. And I've seen in this race, it's so interesting. There are those who say, I really support you. And then there are those who say, I really support you, and they're passing out flyers, they're putting on their Facebook and Twitter, they're sending a financial contribution, they're having a house party, they're putting on a fundraiser. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
To move into action. So what's it going to take? You know, I think that there's a certain point where we stop even asking that question and just stop coddling ourselves, coddling our own weakness, coddling coddling each other. That's the downside. That's the shadow of our side, you know? And I think that when you know that somebody is running on these kinds of issues, I know in my race this is a historic opportunity because there has not been an open seat in this area for 38 years. Henry Waxman, a very fine congressman, has held the seat for 38 years. We have this open seat. It's in Los Angeles, such a powerful vortex, and there is a huge historic opportunity here. So from where I'm standing, you know, when people say to me, what can we do? From my perspective, I said to people like, help me get elected. You know, fine. That's one thing. So we all are called to do, you know, it's always about doing whatever is in front of you.
Yeah, and, you know, we've been so drugged by you know, consumerism. I mean, we used to call ourselves citizens, and now you hear we're consumers, and consumerism has really taken its toll, I think, and just dumbed us down in ways and anesthetized us.
Right, and this is not the time in America to be numb.
Yeah.
And also even the rash of the epidemic of the casual use of antidepressants. You know, psychic pain is there for a reason. If you're looking at the world today honestly and you're not grieving, you're not looking. And that should lead us to change things, not to just numb ourselves and to self-medicate. And we have become separate citizens. And we have become just spectators. You know, politics is like a spectator sport. And, you know, we're just watching the horse race. And that's why, you know, in a way, it's like we're in a house, right? And peace is stealing our democracy. But if we're honest with ourselves, we left the windows open, we left the doors open by disengaging. And that's okay. We realize what we realize when we realize it, but let's engage now. The hour is late. And we don't have a lot more time to grab our democracy from the clutches of corporatism and the aristocracy.
So let's just talk briefly about miracles.
Okay.
I want to know, first of all, your definition of miracle, and then how do we access in our daily lives, and particularly as activists, how do we access miracles when we believe that we have to fight for everything? What role do miracles play in all of this?
A miracle is a shift in perception from fear to love. That's the Course in Miracles description of the miracle, and it works for me. A shift in perception from fear to love. A shift in perception from living in the past or the future to living in the present. From thinking that possibilities are limited to knowing that there is no order of difficulty in miracles and that time and space themselves are malleable. From living in blame to living in blessing. From living in attack to living in forgiveness. From living in not owning when you're transgressing against those things to owning them and trying to do better. Most of us by now pretty much know the principles. The issue is taking that journey from the abstract understanding to the knowledge of the heart and the visceral experience of the gut. I think part of the miracle is knowing that the universe is self-organizing and self-correcting. The embryo becomes a baby. The bud becomes a blossom. The acorn becomes an oak tree. Nature supports those things in happening. And I think similarly nature supports self-actualization of the individual, and nature supports the general enlightenment of the human race. So as we, through spiritual practice, through meditation, through kindness and forgiveness and all of those spiritual values that we care about, live our lives more and more in submission, not as a surrender of selfhood, but as the ultimate assumption of selfhood. to the higher power within us, which is guiding us, then we become part of this great collaborative co-creation of a world that works for everyone. That is a miracle. You know, the founding of this country was a miracle. Abolition was a miracle. Suffrage was a miracle. Civil rights movement was a miracle. You know, the majority didn't wake up one day and say, oh, let's free the slaves. Very few people, very few people stood on conviction around what was right, and life went in that direction. That's why when Obama quotes what turns out not to have been Martin Luther King's quote, the one that he was quoting someone else, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So we start to live our lives in service, not saying, universe, give me what I want, but saying, universe, how could I be of service? How could I be of use to you? And then I think just as every cell in the body is assigned, one cell is assigned to the liver, and one cell is assigned to the heart, and one cell is assigned to the lungs, and so forth. I think each of us are assigned to the mission, to the task that represents the form by which we enliven and activate it within the realm of form, the universal content, which is the drive for love to prevail on earth. And miracles occur naturally as expressions of love. When you stand on something because love dictates it, miracles do happen.
I love that. You are so amazing.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank
I mean,
you.
it's time for us to hear this in the political sphere. I'm proud of you. I'm happy for you, and I'm nervous about it. I'm nervous that you are so boldly stating the truth, and politicians don't do that. And it's
Martin
great.
Luther King, you're so sweet to say that. Martin Luther King said that our lives begin to end on the days we stop talking about things that matter most. And American women have to raise the bar on what we think is courageous. There are women in this world who, if they even leave the house without a male relative and dress the way they might want to do whatever they might want to do, could be publicly lashed or even stoned in the town square to death. So I think just like when you're pregnant, people say to a woman, you're eating for two, I think we need to remember that we are, every time we act boldly, we are doing so for millions of women who cannot do that for themselves.
So true. Shawnee Hunter, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Shawnee. Where are you calling from?
I'm in Kauai. I'm in Keikaha, Hawaii.
Ah, great. Thank you for joining us, Shawnee. You have a question for Marianne?
Yes, I was called to come here to Kauai. Spirit called me. I didn't really know why, but I was landed right next to a lot of the GMO fields here, and I was wondering how you felt on GMO food. I keep getting the answer to become a resident and vote for those who do not support it, because I ride my bike next to these fields and I see these men in these white suits and the things on their face, and they have all of this, they're spraying. So I'm just wondering, how do you feel on GMO fields?
So the question is about GMO.
Yeah. The corruption of America's food supply is a very urgent issue. GMOs, herbicides, pesticides, and so forth. But this is why I keep concentrating and emphasizing getting money out of politics. There's a limit to what we can do about GMOs as long as Monsanto and Dow and Syngenta and so forth and big agricultural companies are able to dominate our policymaking as they are. President Obama has taken a man named Michael Taylor, who was the vice president of policy, public policy at Monsanto, and has now made him deputy food czar. This goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, Then it just happens, and we're just like, oh, okay. So I think I remember being in Maui, and I had an idea from activists there. When Monsanto is doing the sugarcane burning, the thing that they do every year, I suggested that activists in Hawaii put on surgical masks, like, that people were trying to not get the bird flu hat on. And then all the tourists would come and say, "Why are you wearing surgical masks? This is heaven. This is Maui." And the activists would say, "Didn't you know about the toxicity, the burning of the fields that Monsanto is doing?" I thought that was really a great idea. A little bit of agitprop there. So obviously, and I'm running in a district where there is a lot of interest, a lot of concern about GMOs. We had our public forum, our issues forum this month was on health and food in the age of GMOs. Elizabeth Kucinich and Dennis Kucinich were here. Both of them endorsed the campaign. John Robbins, who wrote Diet for New America. So we're big on it here. There is a bill that Barbara Boxer has proposed to label. But labeling is, we can't even get labeling in other countries who are already outlawing GMOs. We need to step it up here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Do we have another caller, Leah?
We do. Leandra Medeiros.
Leandra, can you hear
Hi.
us? Hi.
Yes.
How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for doing this. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask Marianne if she believes in peace/nonviolence education and the importance of a Department of Peace.
Very much I believe in peace and nonviolence communication education, and I very much believe in the Department of Peace, which is now, Kucinich, who first introduced the bill, is no longer in Congress, but Congresswoman Barbara Lee has introduced it again as the Department of Peace Building. I very much support it, was instrumental in the Department of Peace campaign when it first began. This, for those who do not know, would be a cabinet-level position in the executive branch of the U.S. government, whose job would be to facilitate and research and articulate a nonviolent problem-solving option, which is extremely important. You can liken our military to the surgery department. And sometimes, you might need surgery, so you want to make sure you have a surgeon on board. But there are many times when you would do everything you possibly could to avoid surgery. You would do other things first. And there are also times when surgery is too blunt an instrument and invasive measures actually help spread the disease. So we rather desperately, I think, need a place for a far more integrated, holistic perspective on eradicating violence. And I think that first and foremost has to do with early childhood. Desperate people do desperate things. We need to see desperate people, large groups of desperate people, as a national security risk, whether they are in a corner of our city or across the world. Because if people are desperate and they're all together in a kind of social petri dish, they become more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. Now, that's a more sophisticated conversation than the old politically allopathic conversation. That has to do with creating social health. Educate your children. Create economic opportunities for women. That's how you diminish violence. That's how you wage peace. We need to wage peace as effectively as we wage war. What we do now is an old allopathic model. You don't proactively wage peace. You don't proactively cultivate brotherhood or justice. You don't proactively deal with the desperation of children who, if you don't get to them by 14, forget it, they're over. And then we act surprised when they are captured ideologically. And the old system has two answers, both of which are allopathic, both of which deal only with the external, only with the symptoms, and have absolutely proven over and over again that they are not the answer. The allopathic system says, we have the answer. 1, building more prisons. 2, dropping more bombs. So those of us who do have a more sophisticated, integrated conversation need to speak up now.
Ooh, I love that. Do we have another caller?
So my question for Marianne is, we're experiencing, I know there's an overuse of the term gentrification here in Oakland, but I'm excited about the shift that I see because I see more resources. At the same time, as an advocate for poor people and people being victims of violence, and I'm wondering, besides being politically active, Marianne, what is your advice for poor people to be a part of this shift?
Great question.
Well, the deepest self is neither rich nor poor. The deepest self is neither black nor white. The deepest self is neither male nor female. And our power comes from an alignment with the deepest self. So I think that whenever we identify ourselves as poor, identify ourselves as white or black, rich, Jew, Gentile, male, female, we're not identifying ourselves in our most expanded way. And I think that it's when we dip into the well of the deeper self, which is beyond demographics, beyond socioeconomic demographics, beyond sex, beyond religion. We find that place where we are common with all people. And this gives us, so we are one with all people, not just common, but one with all people. From that place, you will be guided. You will ask someone something way more powerful than I, a voice within yourself, which will tell you where to go, what to do, how you can best serve, and you will take the passion that you have for those living in poverty, and you will know that that is your ministry on this earth this time, at least for now. How do I know that? Because that's where your passion lies. So if we place our passion in the hands of God, place our passion in the hands of the divine, by whatever name we call him, and or her or it, and ask to be used and ask to be of service, then you will be given answers. They will not come from another human being. Something will happen deep within your heart. And then other people will say things, you'll see notices, but you will be led. The path will be paved. But I think that's why the primary work is spiritual. The primary work is within ourselves. And then we are guided, and our path is illumined, whereby we do the external work that matters most.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really am impressed by all the questions and the callers, and, of course, Marianne, your answers are just superb, as always. But before we close, we're getting ready to close soon, unfortunately. I want to let folks know out there that Leah will be posting a survey. And the survey is really simple and easy to fill out. We've made it as simple as possible, and we really need you to fill it out. Do that for us, because it really helps us know when we're hitting the mark and where we're not. So I really am encouraging you to fill out the survey. And now it's time to just thank you, Marianne. Thank you for taking the time out to be with us in this busy campaign that you're on. And we want to really wish you absolutely success and the best in everything that you do.
Thank you.
And I'm hoping, too, that we all, I know that I've had some takeaways, and I'm hoping that our audience has had some takeaways on all kinds of ways of how to engage as citizens and acting from love and really being engaged in the world in the way that our heart is calling. And you have been such a role model, Marianne Williamson, so thank you so much for what you're doing and for being with us, and we just want to acknowledge you and what you bring to the world. So thank you for everything.
Thank you for everything. Thank you so much. God bless you, Konda.